Growing up with depression in a rural town, I've always struggled to obtain affordable mental health supports due to their imbalance in regional areas. From this, I often felt isolated, fearing the stigma surrounding the youth mental health crisis. Reflecting on this experience, I've always wished that others would not endure similar suffering. Hence, I centered my learning goal around supporting other teenagers in my community experiencing depression, leveraging my coping mechanism of artistic creation to promote conversation around awareness. A highly valuable manufacturing strategy was visually benchmarking my t-shirt prototypes against existing t-shirts I owned. Prior, I saw feedback by uploading pictures of my stretch stitching on Reddit, Facebook, and Quora. Importantly, my limited confidence, communication, and networking skills made online feedback more accessible than contacting professional tailors via email. However, I experienced an unexpected setback as limited responses provided vague insights for improving my stitching technique. Thus, pivoting to my visual benchmarking strategy deliberately leveraged my strengths in visual learning to improve my analytical reasoning. From this, I simultaneously identified that my stitching tension was uneven compared to industry standards. Although this strategy failed to provide actionable solutions, it remained quite valuable by guiding me to seek expert feedback from Andrew, a tailoring business owner, to improve my uneven stitching tension. Seeking expert feedback via email was a personally valuable learning experience as it encouraged me to proactively improve my confidence, communication skills, and ability to ask for advice, such as from my English teacher when drafting emails to feel assured of my expression. Training his own employees for 8 years, Andrew's feedback was accessible for beginners like me, suggesting that I have uneven stitching tension and switching from cotton to polyester would improve it and being cheaper. Therefore, his feedback reinforced the value of my visual benchmarking strategy through alignment with Andrew's expertise, identifying a common problem. Therefore, I switched from cotton to polyester for practice but not final t-shirt production. As polyester's environmental implications conflicted with my values, I retained cotton to balance practice feasibility with outward t-shirt comfort. Consequently, switching from physically demanding cotton to less strenuous polyester increased my stitching speed and placement, while upholding my principles in manufacturing an ethical product. Combining Andrew's feedback with my visual benchmarking strategy, I observed that although polyester practice improved my stitching tension, minor stitch gaps prevented the production of commercially viable t-shirts. As Andrew's beginner-aimed feedback was likely implemented correctly, I realized that my uneven stitching tension stemmed from flaws in my stitching motion. At the same time, as I was showing signs of fatigue associated with past mental blocks, overcoming psychological barriers emerged as a fundamental next step to identify flaws in my stitching motion. Therefore, I pivoted towards selecting my school counselor's perspective on my learning psychology. I gained an insight that I'm hesitant to take risks when consequences seem greater. Further explained through synthesizing my mum's perspective that my intrinsic association of cotton's higher monetary value intensified my perception of consequences. Resultantly, by reflecting that I had previously switched to cheaper and contextually lower stakes polyester, I took advantage of my learning psychology by engaging in trial and error. Crucial to my stitching development, I discovered that lowering my penetration angle to 30 degrees eventuated in straight stitching with even tension as visible in my output. Therefore, using adapted strategies, synthesized perspectives, and targeted feedback interrelatedly led to my first output t-shirt. Measuring this learning development using my strategy of visual benchmarking revealed stitching comparable with t-shirts I owned. This supported my realization that my extent of learning was approaching industry standards. Furthermore, this learning development was connectedly measured using questionnaire feedback from community members who wore my t-shirts. I received the feedback that although they look comparable to their t-shirts, minor stitching protrusions along the shoulders cause itchiness when worn. This can be explained by my trial and error experimentation unsuccessfully developing viable shoulder seam techniques, which lowered confidence and skill development in angular stitching. This taught me that structured practice can be vital to improvement, a learning development evident in my output whereby my t-shirts contain minor holes between just shoulder stitches and not others. Thus, by analyzing how different aspects of my learning interacted together, I can now praise that my t-shirt manufacturing learning development approached industry standards to an aesthetic extent more than a usability extent. Instead of basing my designs on generic slogans that lack personal connection, I adapted this strategy towards brainstorming my own slogans based on my lived experiences with depression. From testing this strategy at different times, I discovered my mind is most active but least overstimulated during mornings. Hence, strategically brainstorming my slogans before school maximized their time efficiency and quality. This learning experience was personally valuable as I learned to leverage my ADHD as a strength to mitigate time management risks around brainstorming rather than feel ashamed of it. After creating these slogans, I self-questioned their effectiveness but realized that my personal attachment was making my judgment biased. Consequently, I pivoted and sought feedback from my local psychologist, Dr. Jankowiak. He recommended to select slogan 2 as I gained the insight that slogans 1 and 3 were not relatable to other depression sufferers. Invaluably, he suggested not explicitly stating the slogan but instead integrating it subtly into the visual design, as some depression sufferers may feel vulnerable. Initially, I felt discouraged as I struggled to accept that some of my lived experiences were less valuable to others. Reflecting on this setback unexpectedly transformed my previously ineffective self-questioning into my most valuable strategy. Through self-questioning my own slogans, I strengthened my emotional regulation through continued exposure to my harshest critique myself. In turn, improved emotional regulation enabled me to move beyond personal bias and objectively refine my slogans and designs. Monumentally, I now recognize that effectively supporting depression sufferers requires sensitivity towards the different ways individuals experience depression. As I now understood Dr. Jankowiak's feedback, I overcame my hesitancies and collective slogan too. Therefore, the combination of these strategies, feedback, and learning processes led me to design a t-shirt conveying the message that whilst depression is not always visible, it is always real. Importantly, my Instagram output format allowed me to appraise the extent of learning development by visually comparing my initial and final designs. Upon this, I evaluated that although both designs were aesthetically pleasing as my design skills using Adobe 360 were already developed, my final design communicated the intended message more powerfully yet sensitively. Specifically, the umbrella represented the intentional concealment of distress, and the rain symbolized the persistent emotional burden sufferers carry within, reinforcing the value of authentically translating my lived experiences into designs. Interconnectedly, questionnaire feedback from attendees at my Instagram organized community meetups confirmed the effectiveness of my t-shirts. Several teenagers stated that the t-shirts gave them confidence to talk about their experiences with depression. Furthermore, others informed me they were even regularly holding sustained group conversations to support their families, which they would never have initiated prior to receiving their t-shirts. Ultimately, I can now praise that my extensive learning development enabled me to achieve my learning goal to a large extent, which I am truly proud of.